Playing D&D and your DM the storyteller, right?
Mm-hmm.
Paints this picture of a huge shadow falling over you, or maybe you hear those, like, guttural growls getting closer.
Oh, yeah.
That moment, right before the dice start rolling for combat. It's this mix, isn't it? Excitement, but also maybe a little bit of okay, how bad is this going to be?
Definitely. And, as a DM, hitting that sweet spot with combat encounters is, well, it's kind of an art.
It really is.
You want it challenging, exciting, but not so punishing it just becomes frustrating for everyone. It's key to making sure the whole table's having a good time, whether you're after that tension or just that feeling of a hard-won victory.
Exactly. And the good news is it's not just random guesswork. The game actually gives DMs some really solid tools for this. We've been digging into Chapter 13, building combat encounters, and that's our mission today. We want to unpack those official guidelines straight from the source. So whether you're thinking about DMing or you've been doing it for years, you can feel, confident crafting fights that feel just right for your players. We're going to look at the method behind it all.
And just to lay it out, it really starts with understanding the 4 main labels the game uses for encounter difficulty: easy, medium, hard, and deadly.
Okay.
And these aren't just throwaway words. They actually mean specific things about how the fight might feel and what resources the players might need to spend. Think of it like a scale of challenge.
Okay, let's walk through that scale then, starting at the beginning. Easy. What does an easy encounter look like in practice?
So an easy encounter, it's meant to be a pretty minor obstacle. Your players should be able to handle it without burning through a lot of their important stuff. Spell slots, daily powers, maybe not even losing many hit points.
Right.
Victory is pretty much guaranteed. It's maybe more about setting a mood, introducing some minor threat, or just, making the world feel alive.
Yeah, gotcha. So low stakes, maybe a warm-up or a bit of flavor. What about stepping it up to medium?
Okay, medium. Now you're introducing a bit more. Well, risk. There's a genuine threat here. Players might have a tense moment or two where they think, uh-oh, this could go wrong.
Okay.
But the expectation is still that they'll probably win, and likely without anyone actually getting knocked out, going down to 0 hit points. The main difference from easy is they'll likely need to use some resources, maybe cast a healing spell, use a decent attack option, that sort of thing.
All right, so it requires some effort, some resource management, but it's still expected to be manageable. Then we get to hard. That sounds like where things start getting serious.
Yeah, hard definitely lives up to the name.
Yeah.
This is a significant challenge. There's a real chance things could go south for the party. Weaker characters, the squishier ones, they might be in genuine danger of getting knocked unconscious. And the book even says there's a slim chance of actual character death in a hard encounter, especially if luck isn't on their side or they make some poor choices.
Wow, okay.
These fights really demand teamwork and smart play.
Slim chance of character death. That definitely ramps up the tension. And that brings us to the final category. Deadly.
That sounds, deadly.
It absolutely is. You don't throw deadly encounters around lightly. A deadly encounter means there's a very real possibility, maybe even a probability, that one or more player characters could die permanently.
Oof.
Surviving one often takes really good tactics, thinking fast, maybe some clutch dice rolls. There's a genuine risk the entire party could be defeated. These are the fights players remember, for good or ill.
Okay, these descriptions are super useful for a DM trying to aim for a certain feel. But how do you actually build an encounter to fit one of these descriptions? It can't just be gut feeling, right? There have to be some mechanics.
You're absolutely right. There's a system behind it, and it's built on something called XP thresholds.
XP threshold. Yeah, think of them as a numerical measure of how much stress or danger a party of a certain level can handle before an encounter crosses the line into easy, medium, hard, or deadly territory. It's like a difficulty budget for the party.
A difficulty budget. I like that. Okay, so how do we figure out that budget? The source mentions a table, XP thresholds by character level. What's that about?
That table is basically step 1. It's fundamental. For every single character level, from level 1 all the way to 20, it gives you 4 specific XP values.
4 values per level.
Yep. 1 XP value represents the upper limit for an easy encounter for a character of that level. Then there's a value for medium, 1 for hard, and 1 for deadly. So if you've got, say, a 5th level character, you look up level 5 on the table and it tells you exactly how much XP is considered easy, medium, hard, or deadly for that one character.
Got it. So the DM's first job is to look at their party, see everyone's level, and consult this table to find those 4 individual XP threshold numbers for each character.
Exactly. That's the first step. Get the individual thresholds down.
Okay, what's step 2?
Step 2 is calculating the party's total XP threshold for each difficulty level. And this part's pretty simple, actually. You just add up all the individual easy thresholds for everyone in the party. That gives you the party's easy threshold.
Oh, okay.
Then you do the same for medium, add up all the individual medium thresholds. Same for hard, same for deadly. So you end up with 4 numbers that represent the whole party's capacity for challenge at each level. These are your benchmarks.
The source gives a great example. A party with 3 third-level characters and 1 second-level character. Could we walk through calculating their party thresholds?
Sure, perfect example. So you look at the table, a third-level character has thresholds of 75 XP for easy, 150 for medium, 225 for hard, and 400 for deadly.
Okay.
A second-level character is 50 XP easy, 100 medium, 150 hard, and 200 deadly.
Right.
So for the party's easy threshold, we add them up, 75 plus 75 plus 75, plus the 50 for the second-level character. That's 275 XP total.
275 for easy. Got it.
For medium, 150 plus 150 plus 150 plus 100, that's 550 XP.
550 medium.
For hard, 225 plus 225 plus 225 plus 150 equals 825 XP.
825 hard.
And finally, deadly, 400 plus 400 plus 400 plus 200, which comes out to 1400 XP.
Okay, so for that specific party, easy's up to 275 XP, medium up to 550, hard up to 825, and deadly is up to 1400 XP. Those are their benchmarks. Now, how do we figure out the XP value of the monsters we want to use?
Right, that's the other side of the equation. Step 3 is find the monsters you want to use and simply total up their base XP values.
Base XP, where do you find that?
It's listed right in their stat block, the section with all their stats, abilities, attacks. Usually it's right near their challenge rating, or CR. You just look up each monster you're planning to include in the fight and add their individual XP values together.
Okay, so we have the party's XP thresholds, and we have the total raw XP of the monster. Seems like we could just compare those now, right?
Okay.
But I feel like there was a catch. Something about multipliers.
Yes. You remembered the crucial bit. Encounter multipliers. This is step 4, and it's super important.
Why do we need multipliers?
Because... think about it. Fighting 5 goblins is usually a lot harder than fighting one big creature that happens to be worth the same total XP as those 5 goblins combined.
Right, more attacks coming at you each round.
Exactly. It's about action economy. More monsters mean more actions, more potential damage, more effects happening each round. The game recognizes this increased danger from multiple opponents, so you have to apply a multiplier to the monster's total base XP.
Okay, so how does that work? Is there another table?
Yep, there's an encounter multipliers table. It's pretty straightforward. If you only have one monster in the encounter, the multiplier is just by 1, no change to the XP value for difficulty calculation.
Makes sense.
If you have 2 monsters, you multiply their total base XP by 1.5.
Okay, a 50% increase in effective XP.
Right. For 3 to 6 monsters, the multiplier is by 2. You double their base XP for calculation purposes.
Doubled, wow.
For 7 to 10 monsters, it's by 2.5. 11 to 14 monsters, it's by 3. And if you're throwing 15 or more monsters at the party, the multiplier is by 4.
Quadruple the XP value. That's huge. It really shows how dangerous large groups can be.
It really does. It scales up fast. So let's take the sources example. An encounter with 1 bugbear and 3 hobgoblins. Let's say, for the sake of argument, their total base XP adds up to 500 XP.
Okay, 500 base XP. How many monsters is that?
That's 4 monsters total, 1 bugbear, 3 hobgoblins.
Right. 4 monsters.
So we look at the multiplier table. For 3 to 6 monsters, the multiplier is by 2. So we take that 500 base XP and multiply it by 2.
Which gives us 1,000 XP.
Exactly. So even though the monsters themselves are only worth 500 XP total if the players defeat them, for the purpose of figuring out how difficult this encounter is going to be, we treat it as having an adjusted value of 1,000 XP.
Okay, that's a really critical distinction. The 1,000 XP is only for judging the difficulty against the party thresholds. It does not change the actual XP reward the players get later.
Absolutely a vital point. You always award the XP listed in the stat blocks. The multiplier is purely a DM's tool for balancing the fight beforehand.
Got it.
Oh, and there's a little nuance mentioned too. If you have a whole bunch of really weak creatures mixed in that aren't significantly contributing to the danger, like maybe some harmless rats scurrying around you, generally don't count those towards the number of monsters for the multiplier. It's about the creatures actually posing a threat.
That makes sense. You don't want a few bats flying around to artificially inflate the difficulty of fighting a dragon because they push the monster count into a higher multiplier bracket.
Precisely.
Okay, so step 1. party thresholds. Step 2, add them up for the party total. Step 3, total the monster base XP. Step 4, apply the multiplier based on monster count to get the adjusted XP. What's the final step? Step 5.
Step 5 is simple. Compare. You take that adjusted monster SP value, the 1000 XP in our Bugbear and Hobgoblin example, and you compare it to the party's XP thresholds that you figured out earlier.
Right. Our example party had thresholds of easy 275, medium 550, hard 825, and deadly 1400.
Exactly. So where does 1000 XP fall? It's higher than the hard threshold of 825, but it's lower than the deadly threshold of 1400.
So it's a hard encounter.
Correct. The rule is the encounter's difficulty matches the highest threshold that the adjusted monster XP exceeds. Since 1000 exceeds the hard threshold, 825, but not the deadly one, 1400, it lands squarely in the hard category for that specific party.
Okay, that clicks. The adjusted XP tells you where it sits relative to the party's capacity. Now, the source also brought up some other important things DMs should think about, kind of beyond the core math. Let's talk about the challenge rating caution.
Yes, this is super important, especially for DMs running games for like level 1 to 3 characters. The advice is basically be really careful using monsters whose challenge rating CR is much higher than the party's average level.
Even if the XP math looks okay.
Even then, because a high CR monster, even one that fits into, say, a hard XP budget, might have attacks that deal so much damage in one hit that they can just instantly knock out or even kill a low-level character.
The ogre versus first-level wizard problem.
Exactly the example they use. That ogre might technically fit the XP budget, but one swing from its club could flatten that poor wizard. So CR is another layer of consideration, particularly at lower levels where PCs are more fragile.
Good warning. What about party size? We base the thresholds on 3F5 players. What if you have fewer or more?
The system needs a slight tweak then. The multipliers we discussed assume that standard party size. If you have a small party, fewer than 3 characters, the guideline is to use the next highest multiplier on the table.
Making the encounter effectively harder.
Right, because the party has fewer actions, less resilience. So fighting just one monster, you'd use the by 1.5 multiplier as if they were fighting 2. Fighting 15 plus monsters, you'd actually go one step higher than by 4, maybe call it by 5, because it's super dangerous for a small group.
Okay. And for larger parties, 6 or more players.
You do the opposite. You use the next lowest multiplier. They have more actions, more resources, so they can handle more. Fighting one monster, you might use a by 0.5 multiplier, effectively treating it as easier.
That makes sense, adjusting the perceived threat based on the party's overall action economy. What about encounters that come in waves, those multi-part encounters?
Right. Sometimes you don't throw all the enemies at the party at once. Maybe reinforcements arrive, or they clear one room and enemies attack from the next. For these, you calculate the difficulty of each wave separately, using the normal XP and multiplier rules.
Okay, so wave 1 might be medium, wave 2 might be easy.
Exactly. But the key thing to remember is the party usually doesn't get a short rest between those waves. They're fighting continuously.
So the challenge adds up.
It really does. That cumulative drain on resources, hit points, spell slots, abilities can make the whole sequence feel much harder than any individual wave calculation might suggest. The source notes that if the total adjusted XP across all the waves adds up to more than about a third of the party's entire expected XP for the whole adventuring day, that multi-part encounter is going to feel significantly tougher.
Good to know. It's about attrition. Okay, what about working the other way? Say I want to design a medium encounter. Can I use the party's thresholds as a guide? Building encounters on a budget, I think they called it.
Absolutely. This is a really practical approach. You know your party's thresholds for our example party. Medium was between 275 and 550 adjusted XP, right? Oh, wait, no. Medium was 550 to 825. Hard was 825 up to 1400.
Right, 550 to 825 for medium.
So you look for monsters whose total adjusted XP falls into that 550-825 range.
Yeah.
The source gives examples. Maybe one CR3 monster worth 700 base XP, multipliers by 1, so 700 adjusted XP, bang, right in the medium range.
Perfect.
Or maybe 2 dire wolves. They're 200 XP each, so 400 base XP total. But there are 2 monsters, so the multipliers by 1.5. 400 times 1.5 is 600 adjusted XP. Again, nicely in the medium bracket.
So you can use the monster manual, look at CRs and XP, play around with numbers and multipliers until you hit your target difficulty budget.
Exactly. And remember, because of those multipliers, groups of monsters tend to be more expensive in terms of your adjusted XP budget than single, tougher creatures.
That's a really useful framework. Yeah. The source also mentioned the adventuring day as a whole. What's the main idea there?
It's about pacing and long-term resource management. The idea is that between long rests, the big overnight recovery, a typical party can handle a certain total amount of challenge.
Like a daily limit.
Sort of. The guidelines suggest most parties can handle about 6 to 8 medium or hard encounters in a full adventuring day, assuming they get a couple of short rests sprinkled in. Fewer if they're deadly, more if they're easy.
Okay.
There's another table, Adventuring Day XP, which gives an estimate of the total adjusted XP a character of each level can typically handle per day. You add these up for your party to get a rough daily budget. It helps you, as a DM, avoid burning your players out by throwing too many tough fights at them back-to-back without enough chances to recover. Those short rests are important.
Right. It's about the bigger picture, not just isolated fights. Now, we've talked a lot about the numbers, but reality isn't always just numbers. How do things like the environment or special situations affect difficulty?
Yeah, this is where the DM gets to add flavor and tactical nuance. The environment and specific circumstances absolutely impact how hard a fight feels. The basic rule of thumb is, if the situation gives the party a significant drawback that the enemies don't have, you should probably treat the encounter as one step harder than the XP math suggests.
Like bumping a medium encounter up to hard.
Exactly. And conversely, if the party has a significant advantage that the enemies don't share, you can treat the encounter as one step easier. Maybe knock a hard encounter down to medium.
Can these stack?
Yeah.
Like multiple advantages?
Yep. The source says multiple benefits or drawbacks can have a cumulative effect. So 2 significant disadvantages might bump the difficulty up 2 steps.
Okay, can you give some examples of these situational things? What's a drawback?
Sure. Drawbacks could be things like the party is surprised, but the monsters aren't. The monsters have great cover, but the party is out in the open. Maybe the party can't see the enemy. Well, darkness. Fog, but the monsters have dark vision or blind sight. Or the party is taking damage from the environment, like acid rain or lava, that doesn't affect the monsters. Or maybe their movement is severely hampered: deep mud, treacherous ice, climbing.
Got it. And benefits are just the flip side.
Pretty much. The party gets surprised, they have the good cover, they can see better, or maybe there's something in the environment they can cleverly use against the monsters.
So a smart DM can really tweak the feel of a fight just by setting the scene and the circumstances, even using the same monsters.
Absolutely. It adds a whole layer beyond just the monster stats and XP.
And finally, the source shifts gears a bit to talk about making combat encounters not just balanced, but, well, fun. What makes combat fun and memorable?
Right, because a perfectly balanced encounter can still be boring if it's just, hitting each other in an empty room. The fun comes from engagement.
So what adds engagement?
Things like interesting terrain. Make it risky. Maybe a rickety rope bridge over a chasm or slippery patches of green slime. That forces choices.
Yeah, do I risk crossing?
Exactly. Changes in elevation are great too. Pits, crates to jump on, ledges for archers, balconies. It adds a third dimension.
Makes positioning matter more.
Definitely. Features that encourage movement and interaction, think swinging chandeliers, stacks of explosive barrels, maybe some active traps like scything blades. These stop fights from becoming static slugfests.
Get people moving around.
Placing enemies in interesting spots, snipers up high, ambushers hidden. And using a mix of monster types that work together, that have different roles, like brutes protecting spellcasters or skirmishers flanking. That makes the fight much more dynamic than just facing 6 identical skeletons.
All of those sound way more exciting than just standing toe-to-toe. It's about creating interesting problems for the players to solve with their abilities and teamwork.
That's the goal. Balance is the foundation, but these elements are what make the encounter memorable and really enjoyable.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up with a quick summary of the core process for building these encounters. What are the key steps again?
All right, step 1. Calculate the party's XP thresholds, easy, medium, hard, deadly, based on character levels using that table.
Step 2. Total up the base XP of all the monsters in your planned encounter from their stat blocks.
Step 3. Apply the encounter multiplier to that total base XP based on the number of monsters involved to get the adjusted XP value.
Step 4. Compare that adjusted XP value to the party's thresholds to determine the baseline difficulty: easy, medium, hard, or deadly.
Step 5. Remember to consider other factors: CR versus party level, especially low levels, party size adjustments, how multi-part encounters work, the context of the adventuring day, and, importantly, any situational modifiers from the environment or circumstances.
And don't forget step 6. Make it fun. Add interesting terrain, elevation, interactive elements, varied monsters.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Understanding these guidelines really gives DMs the power to fine-tune the challenge, push players without crushing them, and just make the whole D&D combat experience better for everyone.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
So for all you DMs listening, we really hope you'll take these tools and, mess around with them. Experiment. See how they work in your games. Try different monster combos. Think about how the battlefield itself can be a character in the fight.
Yeah, don't be afraid to try things out. And maybe here's something to chew on. Once you get comfortable with deliberately setting difficulty, how does that change the stories you can tell?
Ooh, interesting point.
Could putting a truly deadly encounter in front of the party, even if they somehow scrape through, actually make the narrative stronger? Does facing and maybe surviving that level of threat forge bonds or create plot points you wouldn't get otherwise? Something to think about.
Definitely something to think about. We'd love to hear your experiences with encounter building and storytelling in the comments.
Yeah, let us know.
Well, thanks for diving deep into the nuts and bolts of combat encounters with us today. If this breakdown was helpful for you, please do hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into D&D rules and lore. Check out our other videos too.
Thanks for listening.
Until next time, keep rolling high and happy adventuring.